Something I've become recently aware of while working with students is just how you get used to doing stuff and you don't appreciate that other people just sort of don't have that experience or don't have that knowledge. Coming from sort of what is now 35 years of messing around with sound, meeting students that have just barely even touched or created anything, right, is like, oh shit, they just don't know that stuff, even the things I would take for granted. And I see this again a lot when working with artists, and they'll send an email and they want to release something, and you get this sort of like always this sort of very formal, often apologetic sort of opening to the correspondence, as if like there's been some agreement somewhere on the internet that says this is how you're meant to write to people, right? I mean, obviously you want to be nice, but there's a lot of different ways you can be nice. You can be genuine for a start. So I feel like it's always interesting to see like how the personality shifts after that first email. One way I do that is I'll respond immediately with really rough, loose slang, full of swear words response, and then you can kind of visibly see from the next email the conversation relaxes, right? And you can kind of get into the reality of stuff. And I've kind of wanted to talk about this and many other things with these videos, but it's sort of difficult to do sometimes to know, like I said, right? You're not always aware of it. So this morning, my partner Lucia shared me this letter that Steve Albini, who sadly passed away recently, sent to the members of Nirvana on their what ended up being their final project. And it's just full of stuff that I was just grinning and nodding along to. So I kind of want to read that out and just sort of interject and see, just kind of see what stuff we discovered. So this is where you can see it. Like it's by this user Sean Usher. I think he just posts various letters. I'm not sure, not really look for the rest of the website, but I'll put the link in description. But I'm going to read through this. So firstly, like the first paragraph's hilarious. So Kurt, Dave and Chris, first let me apologies for taking a couple of days to put this outline together. When I spoke to Kurt, I was in the middle of making a Fugazi album, but I thought I would have a day or so between records to sort everything out. My schedule changed unexpectedly, and this is the first moment I had to go through it all. Apology. So just straight out of the gates, like, just, you know, but it's almost like Steve knows, right? It's like he knows the deal, and he moves past it pretty quickly. I think the very best thing you can do at this point, so this you can tell there's a conversation that's already happened at this point, it's kind of straight into it. I think the very best thing you can do at this point is exactly what you were talking about doing. Bang out a record in a couple of days with high quality but minimal production, in quotes, and no interference from the front office bullet heads. If that is indeed what you want to do, I would love to be involved. So straight away, there's like, this is kind of like continuing that conversation, having an idea of what the deal is, also kind of aware of like maybe what the problems were before, and just sort of setting the tone of like what Steve wants to be involved. So he continues, if instead you might find yourselves in the position of being temporarily indulged by the record company only to have them yank the chain at some point, hassling you to rework songs, sequences, production, calling in hired guns to sweeten your records, turning the whole thing over to some remix jockey, whatever, then you're in for a bummer. I want no part of it. So I think this is great, right? Setting like the norm and then saying, but this is how we're going to do it. Otherwise, I'm not in, right? So this is kind of, and even the way that Steve's like addressing, like if they want to do that and being really negative about it, beautifully negative, I should add, is pretty cool. So I'm only interested in working on records that legitimately reflect the band's own perception of their music and existence. If you will commit yourself to that as a tenet of the recording methodology, then I will bust my ass for you. I'll work circles around you. I'll wrap your head with a ratchet. I've worked on hundreds of records, some great, some good, some horrible, a lot in the courtyard, and I've seen a direct correlation between the quality of the end result and the mood of the band throughout the process. If the record takes a long time and everyone gets bummed and scrutinizes every step, then the recording bears little resemblance to the live band, and the end result is seldom flattering. Making punk records is definitely a case where more work does not imply a better end result. Clearly you have learned this yourselves and appreciate the logic. Yeah, like I just hear this a lot, and I've embraced this massively in the later years of making music. I mean, arguably, I think in the early days, I didn't spend a long time on it then, but I always felt like, I don't spend a lot of time on this stuff, I must be doing something wrong, but then also like, but it sounds good. So there's this real kind of argument in my head. As it got later, and just realizing like sort of somewhat a bit of a time constraints, but also looking into sort of different approaches and a lot of different things. Namely, like the Plastic Man Sheet One album was written a weekend. The nature of Jeff Mills, like banging out techno, really rough and ragged. Just my own practice, watching my partner Lucia, how she just goes about stuff, like very sort of matter of fact and quick. And the sound, if this sounds good, it sounds good. So sort of Steve understands that. And even in like the infrastructure of big labels, a big band like Nirvana, and back then I don't think you could get bigger than Nirvana really for new bands other than like big celebrity type Madonna, Michael Jackson, etc. Let's just bang this thing out, right? Let's just spend as little time as possible and just make a good record, right? It doesn't need necessarily all this scrutiny and extra stuff that often gets lumped in there almost to just justify people's pay packets. About my methodology and philosophy. So there's some steps here. 1, most contemporary engineers and producers see a record as a project and the band as only one element of the project. Further, they consider the recordings to be a controlled layer of specific sounds, each of which is under complete control from the moment the note is conceived through to the final 6. If the band gets pushed around in the process of making a record, so be it, as long as the project meets the approval of the fellow in control. My approach is exactly the opposite. I consider the band is the most important thing, as the creative entity that spawned both the band's personality and style, and as the social entity that exists 24 hours out of each day. I do not consider it my place to tell you what to do or how to play. I'm quite willing to let my opinions be heard. If I think that the band is making a beautiful progress or a heaving mistake, I consider it part of my job to tell them. But if the band decides to pursue something, I'll see that it gets done. I think that's really great. Like understanding, like, just like the expert in the room of the music that's being created is the people that are creating it, right? And there's obviously a bit more of a traditional role to set up here, even within the kind of anti-corporate entity that Steve and Nirvana are working within. They're kind of like, I'm kind of working with you, but you still get the shots, I'm kind of here to provide a service. I'm not here to dictate the record. So I think that's really, really key. Just kind of the conception and like delivery of roles within any project, even if it's just a small project, I think is so important. And just kind of establishing, even if in your own mind, just kind of where you're at and just being transparent on that, I find so helpful. Like the way we work with a label is constantly challenging roles of sort of artist and label. Is like the artist label relationship, I just bores the shit out of me. It's, there's lots of good examples of that working well, like from the consumers or listeners sort of perspective, but in the sense of just people doing the work and just sort of, let's just dig this hole together, as opposed to it being like, no, this is my hole, and you must facilitate like the delivery of this fucking hole I'm digging. It's like, maybe we just concentrate on digging, right? Because we need to plant some potatoes. That's kind of how I feel anyway, let's continue. I like to leave room for accidents or chaos. Making a seamless record where every note and syllable is in place and every bass drum is identical is no trick. Any idiot with the patience and the budget to allow such foolishness can do it. I prefer to work on records that aspire to greater things like originality, personality, enthusiasm. If every element of the music and dynamic of a band is controlled by click tracks, computers, automated mixers, gates, samplers, and sequencers, then the record may not be incompetent, but it certainly won't be exceptional. It will also bear very little resemblance to the live band, which is certainly what all this hooey is supposed to be about. So I think, like, obviously Steve has listed out a whole lot of stuff that is electronic kind of based where I use, right, and I value. He's not discrediting those things. It's just in the context of that time and a live band, introducing essentially computers, timing, this kind of perception of reaching perfection, embracing technology in kind of conformist ways, as opposed to like, there's technology there, but it doesn't mean we have to use it, right? People get wrapped up in efficiency, like, oh, you can do so much more in this software, why would you do it that way? Well, maybe it sounds better. Maybe I like spending a week making this thing out. Ultimately, it's out of time, right? Pause tapes. I mean, I've done real basic pause tapes when I was younger. Ortega, like, famously done, loads of hip hop artists do pause tapes. Just the time it takes to do something like that, just pressing record, pausing, putting a loop, spreading from record, pausing, playing a loop. You just get this really kind of rough and raw, every kind of sequence is different, that you're just not going to get in software. I mean, yeah, all right, you get a plugin, but it's not the same. It's just not the same. Sonically, it's going to be comparable, but the process of working it's not the same. You know, you sit down with the latest A to B 100% accurate Juno 106 plugin, and there are some, and then sit in front of a Juno 106 and actually play it. It's a different experience, and therefore, if it's a different experience, it's going to fucking sound different. So I feel like this is kind of in the same ballpark, right? Knowing what you want, and then ensuring that that's kind of the environment you're kind of working with. And in this case, it's like, let's not embrace some of this modern stuff. What else have we got here? I've lost my place. Yeah. Step 2. I do not consider recording and mixing to be unrelated tasks which can be performed by specialists with no continuous involvement. 99% of the sound of a record should be established while the basic take is recorded. Your experiences are specific to your records, but in my experience, remixing has never solved any problems that actually existed, only imaginary ones. I do not like remixing other engineers' recordings, and I do not like recording things for somebody else to remix. I've never been satisfied with either version of that methodology. Remixing is for talentless pussies who don't know how to tune a drum or point a microphone. So I think I'm not 100% sure. I feel like the term remixing in this context and how I think about it, like remixing a track, might be different, might be the same. It's either remixing, i.e. changing the mix, changing the levels, changing the EQ. It may mean taking the original song idea and then doing something slightly different with it. I think in either cases, perhaps what Steve's talking about applies. I think immediately of Enjoy the Silence by Depeche Mode. I think the original one Martin Gore come up with was like, as often was, like piano or acoustic guitar and him sort of singing. And this, when it actually went into sort of the producer's sort of role and the label got involved. I believe Daniel Miller come in at some point at that time. It's documented online quite a lot that they sort of and this was sort of 90s, I think, I want to say early 90s. Techno 4/4 kick drums were kind of the thing, so you can see Enjoy the Silence was like 4/4 kick drum, and I think the initial reaction from the band was like, what the fuck is this? Didn't like it, but then it went on to be one of their biggest records. So, I mean, you know, you grow to like things maybe, or maybe if your house is bought, maybe members of the Depeche Mode say, well, our track's okay. Who knows? But yeah, certainly knowing the place and knowing the impact. Step 3, I do not have a fixed gospel of stock sounds or recording techniques that I apply blindly to every band in every situation. You are a different band from any other band and deserve at least the respect of having your own tastes and concerns addressed. For example, I love the sound of a boomy drum kit, say a Gritac or Camco, wide open in a big room, especially with the Bonham double-headed bass drum and a real painful snare drum. I also love the puke-inducing low end that comes off an old Fender Bassman or an Ampeg guitar amp, and the total blown-out sound of an SVT with broken-in tubes. So I know nothing about guitars, so I hope I pronounced that right. But essentially, if it sounds good, if it's broke, whatever. I also know that those sounds are inappropriate for some songs, and trying to force them is a waste of time. Predicating the recordings of my taste is as stupid as designing a car around the upholstery. You guys need to decide and then articulate to me what you want to sound like, so we don't come at the record from different directions. I think that as well, right? Like something I do a lot is when there's kind of like firstly, when someone sends some music, trying to get them to send it, even if it's like, if the conversation's like, hey, I was thinking about sending you, because that's the other approach. It's like not the polite formal introduction to your music, but the casual, hi, how you doing? Just want to have a chat, and then email through is like, do you want to check out my music? Which is equally as fun. But like often that comes with like a sort of work in progress, which personally I much prefer, because you end up getting into the raw essence of what it is, and not the contrived, like formal, elegant stuff like Steve was talking about, like overly engineered. Here's my golden turd on a cushion, right? Do not touch it. It's like, well, at that point, collective working's kind of out the window. There's some places, but still, it's kind of better when it's in a raw state. So then you get this sort of you need a conversation, you need some back and forth about this, and kind of dismantling the artist label kind of traditional tropes. And one way I do that is like, hey, this is what I hear when I hear this music. So I just send them loads of music that's in my mind. So I'll often like be referencing some Recon, or I'll be referencing some some of the minimal early 12K stuff before they went a bit kind of like folky, or I might be referencing like Psychic Warriors of Gaia. Their rhythm release was quite an inspiration, just the same track in different versions, or some Jeff Mills tracks for the energies, whatever it is. And just kind of having that discussion and encourage the person to send audio back, or even I might create audio if they don't, of my own, and say this is kind of a thing, just to kind of get a sense of where you're at, what your palette is. And it's not to kind of convince the other person, oh no, it needs to sound like this. It's just like, this is what I hear. This is what I think this record might be, but it might not be. What do you think? So I think that's really exciting, because then the focus is less on like, no, this is my record, you just need to put it out. Well, then fucking go and put it out yourself. At that point, like, what are we doing, right? I'm just paying for it. Like, just pay for yourself, So I feel like opening that up and having established some kind of collaborative, collective kind of approach is much more interesting. Where are we? Step 3, have I done that? I have done that. Step 4. Where we record, the record is not as important as how it is recorded. If you have a studio you'd like to use, no hag. Otherwise, I can make suggestions. I have a nice 24-track studio in my house. Fugazi were just there. You can ask them how they rate it. And I'm familiar with most of the studios in the Midwest and East Coast, and a dozen or so in the UK. I would be a little concerned about having you at my house for the duration of the whole recording and mixing process, if only because you are celebrities. I wouldn't want word getting out in the neighborhood that you guys having to put up with a whole load of fan-style bullshit. It would be a fine place to mix the record, though, and you can't beat the Vitties. I believe Vitties is vitamin D, right? I'm guessing. If you want to leave the details of the studio selection, lodgings, etc. up to me, I'm quite happy to sort all that stuff out. If you guys want to sort it out, just lay down the law. My first choice for an outside recording studio would be a place called Packidum in Cannon Falls, Minnesota. It's a great facility with outstanding acoustics and totally comfort architect's wet dream mansion where the band lives during the recordings. This makes everything more efficient. Since everybody's there, things get done and decisions get made a lot faster than if people are out and about in the city somewhere. There's also all the posh shit like a sauna, swimming pool, and fireplaces, a trout stream, and 50 acres and like that. I've made a bunch of records there, and I've always enjoyed the place. It's also quite inexpensive considering how great the facility is. I think this is cool, just trying to get people situated and just knowing what the environment is people want to work together in if you're working in person. There's 2 things that come to mind. One was Depeche Mode did something similar in a mansion. I'm using Depeche Mode a lot because I just think of this documentary. And they went and isolated themselves in some mansion. And did it work? I don't know. When you watch the documentary, see if I can dig it out actually and put it on the description. But everywhere else, people are like up and beat about the record. This one, they're really not. And it was their best-selling album. I think mainly because Dave Gahan was lighting candles in his room, having taken heroin, I believe. So, but there was a lot of isolation happening even within the isolation that they put themselves as a collection of people. So like the producer and the band and everyone there were isolated from distractions, but because the facilities provided like an all-inclusive hotel kind of thing, people were playing pool, people were just like Dave was lighting candles. So yeah, who knows? The other example is I had a friend, Stuart Bowditch, come over a while back to work on some stuff that should see the light of day one day. And we talked for like probably 2 hours before we even went into the studio, and just were really angry at like the fucking state of shit. And I was a bit apprehensive, like, he had to travel quite a while, and he's traveled in, and we're not working on music, but he was pretty pissed and wanted to, as in pissed off, wanted to just vent, and I was up for it. And when we went into the studio, the noise that we made was like, we just wouldn't have got there, I don't think, without that kind of setup. So kind of speaks to that. The only bummer about the pack item is that the owner and managers are not technicians, and they don't have tech on call. I've worked there enough that I can fix just about anything that can go wrong, short of a serious electrical collapse. But I've got a guy that works I work with a lot, Bob Weston, who's real good with electronic circuit design, troubleshooting, building shit on the spot. So if we choose to do it there, he'll probably come along on my payroll, since he'd be cheap insurance if power supply blows up or a serious failure occurs in the dead of winter 50 miles from the closest tech. He's a good recording engineer also, so it can be done. He can be doing some more mundane stuff like cataloging tapes, packing stuff up, fetching supplies, while we're chopping away at the proper record, or the record proper. Someday I'm going to talk to Jesus Lizard into going up there, and we'll have us a real time. Oh yeah, and it's the same Neve console the AC/DC band Back in Black was recorded and mixed on, so you know it's going to rock. I think this is quite interesting. Like, it's like there's a bit of name dropping in there, which I guess if you're in that space and you see them as just levels, then it's fine. So it's kind of two ways. I guess that seems to happen in that world a lot. Do you want to sound like AC/DC? I don't know. I don't think Nirvana. Maybe Nirvana were into that sort of stuff. Feels like a bit of Steve, like, I'm all right, you know. I'm all right. I've worked with some cool people. Who knows? But also, like, I've got this crew with me. It's a bit of that. The thing that stands out for me is the tone in which he talks about it. I just like the rawness of it and the roughness that is sort of we can still do in quotes professional or like a good record without being pretentious pricks about it. So I kind of like that. I think step 5 is really cool. Doug, I explained this to Kurt, but I thought I'd better reiterate it here. I do not want and will not take a royalty on any record I record. No points, period. I think paying a royalty to a producer or an engineer is ethically indefensible. The band write the songs, the band pay the music. If it's the band's fans who buy the records. The band is responsible for whether it's a great record or a horrible record. Royalties belong to the band. I would like to be paid like a plumber. I love this. I do the job and you pay me what it's worth. The record company will expect me to ask for a point or a point and a half. And if we assume 3 million sales, that works out to $400,000 or so. There's no fucking way I would ever take that much money. I wouldn't be able to sleep. I have to be comfortable with the amount of money you pay me, but it's your money and I insist that you be comfortable with it as well. Kirk suggested paying me a chunk, which I would consider full payment. And then if you really thought I deserved more, pay me another chunk after after you'd had a chance to live with the album for a while. That would be fine, but probably more organizational trouble than it's worth. Whatever. I trust that you guys will be fair to me, and I know that you will be familiar with what a regular industry goon would want. I will let you make the final decision about what I'm going to be paid. How much you choose to pay me will not affect my enthusiasm for the record. Some people in my position would expect an increase in business after being associated with your band. I, however, have already more work than I can handle, and frankly, the kind of people with such superficialities will attract are not the people I want to work with, so please don't consider that an issue. Call me if there's anything if this is unclear. If a record takes more than a week to make, somebody's fucking up. Oi, I kind of like that. The money thing, I've used the plumber analogy a lot. I think I was talking to Lucy about this earlier. She reminded me the plumber analogy I was always using was like around, you get a lot in the art community especially, but like in like live performances, right? People will put on an event and they'll pay themselves and then they'll offer you the opportunity for exposure. And I think it's the kind of framing that is like, you don't get to determine what you're worth. We get to determine that. And we've decided that exposure is what you want, right? And it's just shit. It's like, and I've always used the plumber in that, right? If your pipes are leaking and you call the plumber and say, hey, if I just share your service, can you fix my leak? They're just going to tell you to fuck off. It's just not going to happen. I really like as well, I use the analogy of we have a building site next door to us at the moment. It's thankfully almost finished. But there is, you don't get the bricklayers and the laborers and the carpenters and everything being like, hey, I need to sign. I mean, maybe they do in the cement, but you know what I mean? There isn't like a signature. There isn't like an authorship that's at stake there. They're just happy to be part of, I mean, that's just an assumption. They are part of a collective building project, right? You'd have to say they're either happy or in some bullshit job that they have no choice in. But the point being, the structure of that system applied to, say, music structure or a music system, I think is really interesting, that we consider ourselves like plumbers or builders. We're just doing a thing, right? And it kind of strips away the ego. It challenges the idea of authorship. It challenges how we interact with those projects or those kind of like outputs as and when. And like you can kind of see how the terminologies in different places start helping the brain think in different ways. So yeah, I mean, you don't get builders arguing that their signature's not on the billboard while it's built. That's the property developer, and kind of the property developer feels like the big corporate record label in this sort of analogy. So that's the first thing I like. I really like also the matter of payment is a two-way discussion, and there's the understanding that there is an industry rate, but then that comes with assumptions of what the industry determines is valuable and why it's valuable, not at all including the people that are actually in that system and what they might want or what they think is valuable. So we use I do mastering and also started doing some private tuition stuff, which I'm only going to start sort of next week, and do a pay what you can model. And I think this is great. And the idea that you can just pay what you can, and what you can pay might be nothing, right? So those people that firstly, the biggest thing that kind of was, there was two things that sort of kicked kind of like worth mentioning, that was sort of friends and supporters of, me being okay, I guess, were really kind of concerned about the pay what you can would open me up to being exploited, right? That people are going to rip you off. People are just going to promise you some money and then not pay you, etc., right? But it's pay what you can, which can be zero. And we know that going in. So there's the thing I'm actually finding is the most prominent sort of area of like discussion is that people want to pay you something, and they don't want to be perceived as ripping you off. So they're like, well, wait, what's the industry rate? So then you have this conversation that's like understands what the situation is at the moment, and then that opens it up to like, well, but then they might share, well, I know it's like maybe £100 or whatever. My mate does it for this much, but I'm like, I've just got a child on the way, and they're weighing up, right? And then you're in their world, and I think that's just much more fruitful, because you're like, well, look, like, what do you want to do? Like, how do you want to work this? And like, if you want to pay nothing now, then that's fine. There might be another project in the future, or there might be some wealthy person out there who really likes paying a lot of money, and they've kind of paid for you if that's what they think is valuable. So I think it just depends. Obviously, there's the context of what we do live under capitalism. Everyone kind of knows that. And then there's some realities there. So in a situation where, and you see Steve doing this, he's like, this is kind of what the rate is, but there's no fucking way I'm accepting that, because that's ridiculous. Like, I don't agree with it. I'm just within it. So I feel like the same way. And you get uniqueness of, having to, your unique situation that I have, that's like more of a hybrid setup, more digital based, versus like a high-end studio that's had all these big names, big shots that sound a certain way. Like they've got bills to pay, right? That I don't have. So it's like, do you want those people to work on the record? Like, is it going to sound good to you? Like, maybe that's what you're paying for, right? So it's just down to the value, and it's an individual thing. So having like a blanket figure is kind of weird when you think about it. Like, this is the going rate, as if we're all equal, and we fucking ain't. So it just, and it's such a strange thing when you do pay what you can. People are like, oh, I'm confused. I don't know how to do this, So it's kind of interesting. I think it speaks volumes for how absurd it is. But anyway, I thought it was a really interesting article. I'm going to put the link in the description, and I recommend sharing it with people. See what you think about it. I don't know. There might be some stuff you agree. I think it's not necessarily my world musically, but it definitely speaks volumes and reminds me of kind of how you might be doing stuff differently. But anyway, I'm going to stop it there. This video is a longer one, but I hope that was useful. I'll catch you next one. Cheers.